Welcome to LookAhead Radio with Tom Arms and Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints around the world this afternoon with our guest, Tom Arms. And of course, always to remind you about Tom, heard every Friday afternoon here on the talk station and radio stations around the world, literally as well as figuratively, as well as LookAheadNews.com. It's always a pleasure to have him join us to find out what's happening worldwide, a different perspective, if you will. He's joining us from the United Kingdom, where it's nearly midnight his time. So with that, Tom, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. Good afternoon, our time. Almost good morning, your time. Howdy.
Good evening, yes.
And quick question. Of course, we're looking at the throes of spring here. It looks like we're getting our spring. What's it like there in the United Kingdom as we speak to you?
I've been practicing this, Lockwood. Blue skies, nothing but blue skies all day long.
Oh, now, and wait a second. This is not music radio, and of course that shouldn't qualify as music. But anyhow, Tom Arms, that's great. So you've got some blue skies there. Temperature, is it normal temperature for you all?
Sort of mid-60s.
Uh-huh. Well,
which is nice. To me, that's perfect.
Well, it's actually weather like we're experiencing here in the States as well. And, of course, to remind you, Tom is an expat. So both he and his wife are U.S. citizens that have taken up residence in the United Kingdom to sort of straighten out that country. By the way, I hope you're succeeding. Let's talk here for a few minutes. We've got a lot going on. It's a crazy world out there, Tom. And my first question, before I even get into specifics, what's the feeling right now, both in the United Kingdom and in Europe? And I'm not necessarily, if you wish to incorporate Brexit and all the other activities, but is there a sense of concern about the unease that we're experiencing in China, in the Pacific and the Atlantic, and of course down in the Mideast? Is there a sense of concern, just out of curiosity?
It depends on where you sit on the political spectrum. Mm-hmm. Or even not, that's not quite right. I mean, everyone's different. I mean, for instance, in this country, if you're a Brexiteer, you think the world is absolutely wonderful and it's all going to be absolutely sunny uplands for years and years to come, and flowers are going to be springing out everywhere. And if you're not, you think we're going to hell in a handbasket.
Well, there's that, but I mean, there is, that's of course with Brexit, but there's so many.
That's with the world. No, that's with the world.
Okay, it's so we basically what you're seeing is what we're seeing here in the States as well. High polarization of the populace. That
yes, if you're a Trump supporter, it's sunny uplands. Everyone's going to be at peace and happy and rich and everything else. And if you're a Democrat, look out.
Well,
you're about to be hit on the head with a big globe.
Well, but I understand that relative to the politics. It's just that with the world politique, and particularly, and we're going to get into this. As a matter of fact, let's start off with this conversation. We've got some visits here to the United States. We've got Egypt's Al-Sisi joining us, and of course the Premier of China joining us. And I can never pronounce his name.
Xi Jinping.
Xi Jinping, thank you very much. He's, a matter of fact, arriving, I think, today in Mar-a-Lago.
I think it's tomorrow, Thursday.
Okay. You're in Europe. You have a clearer view of what's going on in the States than I do. But let's talk about this in these two visits. What is the sense there in Europe? What's the conversation? What's the news?
Well, I mean, in the case of Al-Sisi, he's come and gone. And, of course, you probably know he didn't have very good relations with the Obama administration because he came to power in a coup, and he overthrew what was probably the only democratically elected government Egypt has had in yonks and yonks and yonks. And that didn't fit in well with Obama and his human rights record and everything else. But from the Trump administration's point of view, the people who overthrew were the democratically elected Muslim Brotherhood. And all the Muslim Brotherhood has eschewed violence in return for and replaced it with the ballot box. They are still Islamic oriented. And that doesn't go over well with people like Donald Trump. And so he's a big supporter of Mohammed el-Sisi and has promised him all sorts of aid in the fight against Islamic terrorism in Egypt. Of course, there are 40,000 political prisoners in Egypt at the moment. And so it's a balance. How do you balance the fight against terrorism with the need to support human rights, or do you? That is a question which the Trump administration has to address.
And the other aspect, though, of this is that al-Sisi is more inclined to compromise and work with other nations there in the Middle East, particularly, of course, Jordan and Israel. And Jordan, of course, is very important because it's their next-door neighbor. So is there a sense that possibly al-Sisi will be a stabilizing force, well, if in portions of the Mideast, if not all of the Middle East?
Well, it's difficult to say. I mean, I always take the view that it's difficult for a dictatorship to be a stabilizing influence in the long term.
Okay.
By definition, the problem with dictatorships is that eventually they are overthrown, and when they are overthrown, that is a destabilizing act.
Right. That very true. All right, let's talk about the visit from the Chinese representative, and again, Xi Jinping. Is that correct?
Yes.
And
Xi Jinping, North Korea, South China Sea. Now, the question is, and I think it's a big question, is it going to be linked to trade? Because, the one thing that Trump has in his hand in particular is he's made threats over trade. Is he prepared to use those threats as a bargaining chip to win concessions with the Chinese in relation to North Korea and South China Sea?
Well, the other aspect of this, of course, is China's growth in the South China Sea, its continued expansion into various atolls and islands, and the discomfort that the rest of the Asian countries are having with China.
Well, it's funny you should mention that because they're actually winning over. Malaysia has backed off on its claims. The Philippines is backing off on its claims. Now, there are other countries like Vietnam, which has probably one of the strongest claims and also the largest, and there's no sign that they're backing off at all. But Malaysia and the Philippines have been persuaded with a bit of filthy lucre, I suspect,
right?
Promises of trade deals and aid and things like that, to back off of their claims of South China Sea, which is strengthening their Chinese hands in the South China Sea. On North Korea, that's a completely different issue there.
And of course, now we have the North Koreans launching yet again another missile, as we expect the two world leaders of the U.S. and China meeting tomorrow in Florida. All right, we've got
will Trump will he not enforce some of the trade barriers that he has threatened in order to win Chinese support in stopping the North Koreans? I think that's the big question.
That is the big question. And before we go to the break, how is this being perceived again in Europe, the United Kingdom? What do they see about these visits? What's their takeaway? And it's a little premature, but what's the anticipated takeaway?
Well, it's obviously a very dangerous part of the world, and the United States is the only member of the Western Alliance that has sufficient sway in that part of the world to really influence the outcome.
And of course, I just want to make mention of this, and we're going to get to this in a few minutes. The United Kingdom is looking to create closer relations with China on trade, is it not?
Well, we'll come to that, but Mrs. May is, trying to increase closer relations with just about everyone on trade.
All right. Well, yes, in light of Brexit. All right, we're going to take a quick break after that comment with our foreign editor and observer, Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com, and you can get tomorrow's news today by just simply signing on to LookAheadNews.com and Look Ahead Radio, heard every Friday afternoon here on this station and stations around the world. You're listening to Viewpoints Around the World.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment.
This is Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com's expanded world analysis for the week beginning the 10th of April. Look Ahead broadcasts tomorrow's news today so that you can plan to participate. U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson makes his first appearance at a G7 foreign ministers meeting at the Tuscan city of Lucca on Monday. Top topics will be terrorism, North Korea, the Ukraine, and Syria. Almost exactly the same topics will be discussed the following day when Tillerson visits Moscow for talks with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. The Russians have been hoping to win backing for the Assad regime in Syria, but the recent chemical weapons attack has forced a rethink by the Trump administration. The Spanish courts start an official investigation into Syrian torture and disappearances on Monday, following a complaint from a Syrian-born Spanish national. The Assad regime claims that reports of disappearances, political prisoners, and tortures are all fake news. On Sunday, Turks vote in a referendum which, if passed, will give sweeping new powers to President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Proposed changes include giving power to the president to appoint two-thirds of the judges, pass laws by decree, appoint ministers, and declare a state of emergency. Cyprus is back on the diplomatic agenda. On Tuesday, the leaders of the island's Greek and Turkish community, Nikos Anastasiadis and Mustafa Akinci, meet again in Geneva to rescue stalled peace talks aimed at Cypriot reunification. Brexit remains a top issue. On Monday, Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy is hosting a summit of his southern European counterparts to discuss a common position on Brexit. The Spanish are keen to secure support to make Gibraltar, or at least the future of Gibraltar, a key part of the negotiations. Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull is in India on Monday through Friday. The Australian leader will offer India access to uranium, coal, gas, and renewable energy technology to enable its economy to keep growing at 7% a year. In Brazil, President Michel Temer faces the prospect of being booted out from office when the country's Supreme Electoral Tribunal starts hearings on Tuesday about claims that he and impeached President Dilma Rousseff are guilty of illegal campaign funding. Next weekend is, of course, Easter. On Friday, Pope Francis leads the Way of the Cross at the Colosseum in Rome. On Saturday night, Easter vigils are held in St. Peter's in the Vatican, and the traditional Easter Mass will be held at the Vatican on Sunday. And that was next week's News Today from LookAheadNews.com so that you can plan to participate in the world around you. Stay tuned for Viewpoints Around the World with myself and Lockwood Phillips.
Welcome back to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints Around the World with Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and Look Ahead Radio joining us this afternoon. It's nearly midnight where he is in the United Kingdom, a little earlier in the day for us here on the west end of the Atlantic. Tom, we chatted a few moments ago, and I'm going to work around this issue of Russia here for a few more minutes, and let's talk about the issues there in the United Kingdom, particularly Brexit. And also, I understand Theresa May, as Prime Minister, is headed on some trips. We chatted about some issues related to the economy. Let's start with the deal with Brexit. Is there an opportunity for the United Kingdom to maintain its trade relations? Of course, we were chatting about China just a few moments ago. What's happening there? Because amidst all of this focus on the United States, I think Brexit is a very key player in the world matters today.
Oh, yes, there's no doubt about it. I mean, at the moment, or Mrs. May this past week has been in Saudi Arabia and Jordan, and she basically beating the trade drum all the time, wherever she goes. The Chinese have made it absolutely clear, if we're talking about China, they made it clear that, they're deal with Britain, but they're coming at the end of the queue because for them the EU is more important.
Wow.
So it's like what Obama said during the Brexit campaign. But in the case of China, they've said, we've got to think of our relations with the EU before we think of our relations with Britain. In the case of Jordan and Saudi Arabia, it's slightly different. There are long-standing ties, very, very close ties between Britain and those countries, in particular on weapons. And the Saudis at the moment, as you know, are fighting a war in Yemen against the Houthi rebels. Mm-hmm. And Britain is selling them a lot of warplanes. In fact, $5 billion worth, I think. I've heard that there are more British warplanes in the Saudi Air Force than in the Royal Air Force, in the British Air Force.
Now, the other aspect of this, and we're going to get to this in a little bit, related to humanitarian issues there in the Middle East, and also, of course, the topic of Gibraltar. So we're going to stay with Great Britain for a few more minutes here with Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and LookAhead Radio. Tom, the United States, President Trump has said and extended his hand to the United Kingdom on the grounds that should Brexit fall into place, and apparently it is going to occur, that is the exit from the EU, that the UK will gain favored status with us, with the United States on trade. Does that in some way ameliorate or soften the blow of these changes with China?
Well, we don't know. It's not China so much. It's the EU. It's Europe. 50% of our trade is with Europe now, and there's a good reason for it. Not just because we're members of the European Union, or were members of the European Union. In fact, still are for another 2 years officially. But the fact is that Europe is only 20 miles away. Mm-hmm. Whereas the United States is 3,000 miles away and China's 10,000 miles away. It's just, it's cheaper to trade with Europe. You get a better deal. You know them, we don't quite speak the same language, but, we're familiar with the way they work. There was a meeting this week of the House of Commons Committee for Exiting the EU. And Mrs. May has come out and said, a few weeks ago, she said that if we don't get a good deal, no deal is better than a bad deal. And the House of Commons Committee for Exiting the EU said that's basically a load of rubbish.
No, wait. I'm trying to understand that. What do you mean if we don't, we get a bad deal? What would be the bad deal?
Well, she doesn't say.
Okay.
She doesn't say. That's exactly part of the problem for those who are opposed to Brexit, is they don't know what the deal is. Nobody knows what the deal is. And nobody knows what sort of deal they want.
That's the other question.
It's all up in the air.
We're still focused.
You put your finger on it, Lockwood.
I am, but we're still focused on the European exit, by Britain, and of course we're going to get into other countries as well. What's the news there? But this is a topic we've discussed so many times before, but it is, I think, key. It is interesting, Tom, that the United Kingdom has played such a pivotal role worldwide, not just in Europe, in this conversation and debate. There is no clear lines of departure, and of course, as you've mentioned many times before, all the existing trade deals and trade packages. Is there a possibility that those same trade packages could remain, the European Union notwithstanding?
No, because they're tied to things like free movement of people.
Ah, okay.
It's all part of a package. The EU's made it absolutely clear, and Mrs. May has accepted that there can't be what they call cherry picking. That you can't have the same trade agreements if you don't also accept free movement of people, free movement of services, greater political cooperation, and so forth.
And
it's all part of a package, and it only works as part of a package.
All right, now we're going to probably get into this in a few minutes from now. Again, Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and LookAhead Radio with us this afternoon. Tom, I saw where Hungary and Poland were told that their failure to take asylum seekers, refugees, immigrants, in the near term might in fact exclude them from the EU. The EU feels very strongly about
Article
this.
7. In particular, Hungary is having a problem at the moment. Their Prime Minister there, Viktor Orban, is very right-wing. He's having a real problem with George Soros, whom I think you know.
Yes.
Who's a big critic of Donald Trump as well. I think he's called him a would-be dictator and
and there are others who have
con artist.
Yeah, there are critical people about George Soros as well. But go ahead. Yes.
Anyway, George Soros has a university called the Central European University in Hungary, and it's one of the better universities around. And it was created in 1991 specifically to encourage intellectual freedom, to fight or to help those countries that have suffered from communism and fascism, which Hungary has been both at some point in the 20th century for over long periods in the 20th century. Well, as we speak, the government in Hungary is debating a bill which will almost certainly pass Parliament that will close down the university. And it's being specifically aimed at the university, although it's not being named. It's the way the conditions under which the university is set up, they're saying are going to be made illegal. So the university, which because it encourages things like freedom of speech and intellection and freedom of assembly and things like that, is opposed to the government of Viktor Orban.
Well,
and so they're going to close it down.
It is interesting because we have universities here in the United States that are opposed to freedom of speech, which I find fascinating as well. All right, I want to get back to this related to the European Union here in just a few moments. They've got to also talk about Gibraltar and the relations with Great Britain as well. We're going to get to that in a moment here on Viewpoints Around the World with Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and Look Ahead Radio.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment. We now return to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints on the talk station FM 107 AM 1240. And of course, this afternoon we have joining us Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and Look Ahead Radio. And as always, to remind you as we are speaking with him, it is nearly midnight his time, a little earlier here on the East Coast of the United States. But of course, we operate on God's time, as I like to tell Tom. Tom operates on the Queen's time. So it's just a matter of distance here between the two of us and a common language. Tom, this is an important story and one related to the EU and Brexit. And we were chatting a few moments ago about Hungary and Poland, the acceptance of refugees, immigrants, asylum seekers, but also the topic of international relations, not only with the European Union, but with other countries. Particularly right now, let's talk about Gibraltar, Spain, and Great Britain, because this is all tied up in the events of the day. What's the future there with Gibraltar?
Well, it's a bit up in the air. Now, at the very core of this is a principle of self-determination. And that is that the people who live there should be allowed to determine for themselves what sort of government they're going to have or who's going to govern them. And literally 99% of the people who live on the rock, as it's called, want to be British. They want to be an overseas territory. And they've been saying this for centuries. And it has been British since 1713. Now, the Spanish have been trying to win it back ever since. There have been repeated wars, sieges. In the 20th century, they cut off all the telecommunications links. They closed the border. They did everything to try and get Britain to hand back the rock. But the British, even though they may want to hand it back, can't, because they are wedded to the principle of self-determination, and the Gibraltarians refuse to be part of Spain.
Now, with all of this, and of course we've had other instances of this, what is the value of Gibraltar to Great Britain, the United Kingdom?
Oh, it's got limited value now. It has very little strategic value. The naval dockyard is closed. There are no defense establishments there. it does make a lot of money. The economy is growing at 10% a year, but there's only about 25,000 people who live there because that's how many can cram onto the rock.
Right. And the other aspect of this related to Gibraltar, and by the way, you visited there just recently. What introduction does it provide the African countries into Europe? Is there any benefit? Because I mean, Gibraltar has it not been a springboard for transit from North Africa into Europe?
Not so much. They don't really come to Gibraltar. They go to Ceuta, which is the Spanish enclave in North Africa.
Okay.
And it's a lot easier for them to go to Ceuta than it is to cross the Strait of Gibraltar. And they climb over the fence into Ceuta. And once they're in Ceuta, they're in Spain.
Right.
And so, therefore, they're in the EU.
Yeah, that's the reason I was wondering. All right, let's talk about the...
Ceuta's on the north coast of Morocco, opposite Gibraltar.
Oh, all right. What is the outcome? What's the potential outcome here with Gibraltar? I mean, are the relations with Spain?
I mean, they were feuding up until Spain became part of the EU. And it's one of the conditions of membership of the EU that you cannot have any outstanding political disagreements or territorial disagreements with any members. Mm-hmm. So effectively, when they became members of the EU, they shelved it. They didn't completely dismiss it, but they shelved it. They reached a compromise.
But now that
now that Britain is leaving, it's coming off the shelf.
All right, it's going to be interesting to watch that. Let's talk about a few other items here. We chatted at the outset of the program about the environment in Europe. Let's talk about Marine Le Pen. We've been speaking about Brexit, but also there are other countries that are and other leaders who are challenging the European Union's approach. You've used the word sovereignty. That's been a concern as well. Let's talk about France.
Yes, elections. Well, they had another televised debate last night, and she's been in 2 televised debates, and she's got one more. Generally, she's not a good debater, so she's not winning points there.
Okay.
However, the people who back her, they reckon that 85% of those who back her, which are roughly 25% of the electorate, are absolutely rock solid. They have said they will not change their support. The other main runner is this chap Emmanuel Macron, who also is at 25% in the polls, but only 70 to 72% of those who say they will support him say they would definitely support him and definitely vote for him and are rock solid. So, as I've said before, she has a rock solid standing or group of supporters, but it's flatlined at 25%, whereas Macron is climbing, and he started about 12%, and now he's tied with her. And because it's 2 rounds, all the other people who are in the campaign, when it comes to it, most of them will vote for Macron, which is why everyone is saying he's likely to win.
All right, it's basically it's a process where you're eliminating the weakest candidates to eventually come down to a 1-on-1 race. All right, that's France. I'm curious, and we don't have a great deal of information on this, but circumstances in Germany, Netherlands, Denmark. What's and we mentioned Hungary and Poland. What is the mood in Europe? Is it stabilizing? Because the European Union seems to be that and Russia. We're going to get to that in a moment. But the European Union seems to be a driving issue throughout Europe. Is there any sense of calm developing, or is it still as raucous as it was?
I think we're waiting.
Okay.
We're waiting for the results of the elections in France, and we're waiting for the elections in Germany.
Okay.
And so there's not much that can be done. And, of course, we're waiting for the negotiations on Brexit. And there's not much that can be done on negotiations on Brexit until the elections in France and Germany out of the way.
All right. Let's move to Russia here for a few moments, because Russia is a big player for two reasons. One, the influence politically and economically in Europe. And, of course, it's a major source of natural gas for many countries in Europe. But also the recent attack there in, I think it was it Petersburg?
St. Petersburg.
St. Petersburg. That attack. What is the mood now in Russia? Because we've got to get to Russia and the role that Russia's playing in the Middle East as well. But what's now at play there in Europe insofar as Russia's concerned?
Well, nobody likes terrorism, so everyone has sent letters of support. And, Trump sent a letter of support, Mrs. May sent a letter of support. It's very interesting. In Russia, everyone talks about the big Muslim populations in Britain and the big Muslim populations in France and so forth and so on, where the Muslim population is like 2 to 3%.
Right.
In Russia, it's 15%.
And let me introduce one other aspect of this, Tom. Please correct me if I'm wrong. You have whole regions of Russia that are predominantly Islamic and also, I might add, relatively rural, and I'm being kind. I'm thinking, for example, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, and some of the areas that have Chechnya that are not in good relations with the Russian central government.
No, well, it goes back. I'm sorry, ancient history, but it goes back to the 18th and 19th centuries when these areas were conquered by the Tsar and absorbed into the Russian Empire, on the basis of basically a crusade against Islam by the Russian Orthodox Church. And the Russian Orthodox Church is sort of repository for Russian nationalism. And so they come into conflict together. The Russians are not popular with Muslims for that reason. And 7,000, 800 roughly, 800 Muslims left France for Syria and Iraq. 7,000 left Russia.
Right.
So that gives you an idea of the scale.
It's interesting with that experience, and yet we've got Russia playing a key role in the Middle East. And let's talk about that in relationship to both Turkey and Syria. And then we've got to bring up the gas attack in Syria as well. Russia seems to be trying to play a lot of poker hands at the same time. Is there something about the Russian political system that will accommodate this, or will it eventually begin to unravel? We've had protests in Russia. What's happening there?
Well, again, it's very much an authoritarian government at the moment. It toyed with the idea of democracy in about 1991, but Putin controls the state, the media, and he controls the judges now and everything else. Will it unravel? Again, I come back to what I said before about al-Sisi. Eventually, dictatorships cannot support the protests, and they do unravel. How long it will take, who knows? And what form it will take.
Here's a quick question. Here's a quick question for you, Tom. And this is you're a good observer there in Europe, of course, coming from the United Kingdom and having contact with so many folks in the world politique. And of course, Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com with us this afternoon, or this evening his time, and of course, Look Ahead Radio. Tom, the relationship with between China and Russia, how strong is that? Just as you've got the relationship between Turkey and Russia, how strong are those relationships, or is it a matter of it's some form of self-survival? Each is using the other.
It's very much between all three of those. It's a marriage of convenience.
Okay.
They have a joint vested interest in supporting anti-liberal, authoritarian type of regimes, and in supporting each other.
All right.
But historically, Turkey and Russia have always been at odds because of their geographic positions, if nothing else.
And Russia and China the same way.
In the case of China and Russia, it's who controls the Eurasian landmass.
Right.
That huge area of Central Asia. And at the moment, it suits them well to get on together because together they can oppose the United States and the EU's more Western liberal values and encourage other people to support their values. But, once they see themselves as doing better and winning, then they will start to fall out, as thieves do. They start arguing over the spoils.
With about 30 seconds to go, is economy a major concern for these three players? That's particularly Turkey, of course. There's a possibility that the president of Turkey, Erdogan, will be creating even greater discomfort with the European Union with the announcement that he would like to reinitiate the issue of capital punishment. Is there a possibility that economy is a key component of their concerns, not just military power?
No, I think it's more political.
Really?
And economy is a nice add-on.
Interesting. All right, LookAheadNews.com and, of course, Look Ahead Radio, and the founder of that, both those organizations, those media outlets, is our guest this afternoon, Tom Arms. And you're listening, of course, to Viewpoints Around the World.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment.
Observations of an Expat by Tom Arms from LookAheadNews.com. As far as the proverbial man in the street is concerned, there's very little that separates the extreme right from the extreme left. The results are the same. Power is concentrated in the hands of a small circle of political leaders, suppression of human rights, and the suppression of academic freedom. There are political prisoners, torture, no free press, no free speech, no freedom of assembly, rule by decree, corruption, and politically appointed judges presiding over show trials. That's not to say there are no differences. There clearly are. The left tends to find its oppressive roots in an all-embracing ideology, or in some cases a religion, which claims to offer solutions to all of mankind's problems. You need only embrace it. The far right, on the other hand, is based on a belief that one nation or group of people are superior to all the others. These are the ultra-nationalists. Both groups are adept at conjuring up external threats to justify repression, which is really aimed at controlling internal dissent. In more contemporary times, several countries stand out as glaring examples of paranoid nationalism grabbing the levers of power. A recent example is Hungary. In the 20th century, Hungary suffered mightily from both fascism and communism. One of Hungary's more illustrious countrymen is the billionaire financier and philanthropist George Soros. He fled German-occupied Hungary during World War II and eventually made his way to America, where his financial wizardry netted him billions, most of which he's given away to liberal causes around the world. His biggest single donation, $880 million, was in 1991 to establish the Central European University in his hometown of Budapest. Its purpose was to produce a new generation of politicians, lawyers, journalists, and civil servants who were so steeped in Western liberal values and democratic traditions that Hungary would never again veer towards the extreme right or left. Unfortunately, Soros failed to take into account one Viktor Orban, Hungarian Prime Minister from 1998 to 2003, and then again from 2010 until sometime in the future. The leader of the National Conservative Fidesz party has summed up his political philosophy with the words, illiberal democracy. To many world leaders, such a phrase is a complete contradiction in terms. How, they ask, can you have a democracy in which liberal institutions such as freedom of the press and the judiciary are suppressed? And Orban is suppressing them. He forced the early retirement of most of Hungary's judges and replaced them with his hand-picked political cronies. He's also forced all media outlets to register with the government. If they print or broadcast something which the government doesn't like, then their licenses can be revoked. On top of that, he's passed legislation making it almost impossible for the Hungarian parliament to amend or repeal laws passed by his Fidesz party. Orban's most visible stand has been over the issue of accepting, or not accepting, any EU-directed refugees. Razor wire fences are strung along the border, and any refugee who manages to climb through is chased down by dogs. He's become a talisman for the EU's anti-refugee lobby. Not surprisingly, one of Orban's strongest critics is George Soros. It is also no surprise that the Central European University has become an intellectual incubator for the anti-Orban camp. Demagogues hate dissent, so Orban decided to shut it down. Of course, he couldn't just throw out all the students and staff and lock the doors. He had to find a legal ploy. As one was not easily to hand, he created one. The Central European University is based in Budapest, but funded from America. Orban this past week passed a law through Parliament banning foreign-based universities from operating in Hungary unless they had a campus in their home country. Surprise, surprise, the CEU was the only such university in Hungary. But knowing George Soros, this fight is far from over.
Welcome back to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints around the world with Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and Look Ahead Radio. Tom, as we wrap it up, there are a few items that we do need to touch on. One has to be with Syria, and this is a major issue. I asked at the opening of the program, how does the United Kingdom, how is Europe seeing the world in the events that have been taking place over the past months? And of course, even just recently in Syria with the gas attack of Syrian civilians. And of course, there's a lot of finger pointing. What is the play on that in Europe as we speak?
Well, I haven't found anyone who believes either the Russians or the Syrians, their story that it was the fault of the rebels. Mm-hmm. And basically everyone, the UN, all the aid agencies, everyone say that it was the Syrians who did it. And so nobody believes them. I think it's very interesting. There's going to be a debate in the Security Council, I think, tomorrow. Mm-hmm. It might be tonight. And it'd be very interesting what comes out of that. Mrs. May, the British Prime Minister, has roundly condemned both Russia and Syria and said that Assad has to go. Trump has called it a heinous act, but everyone's wondering over here, that there were hints from Nikki Haley and Tillerson that perhaps Assad should be allowed to stay. And whether or not this chemical weapons attack will make the Trump administration change its mind. Some people have even suggested that when Tillerson and Haley said that Assad should stay, they've actually suggested this was a bit of a green light for Assad and the Russians to step up their attacks.
That goes right up there with the issue of the failure to respond when President Obama said that there's a line in the sand. That's on the extreme, and one would have to gag at such a comment, Tom, that it would even be perceived as that, because there has been nothing done, quite frankly, to remove Assad, and in fact, much of Europe has sort of taken a hands-off approach to this as well. Russia's stepping into the vacuum, as we both have seen, as has Turkey. So I would have to say to you that's an egregious remark made by anyone. Let's talk about this in relationship to the Russian relationship with Syria, because they have been big supporters of Assad. Turkey, of course, well, sort of a Trump player, pardon that pun. The question now, and with just a few moments ago, because we'll move on to other items, what is going to happen? Will Europe actually step into this? Will they actually fight Assad? And what does that do with the relations with Russia?
Europe doesn't have an army.
Oh, that's a weak excuse, and we've said this.
No, it's not a weak excuse.
It's a weak excuse.
It's not a weak excuse. The British are overextended. Well, the French might be able to do something. Should the Americans get involved? Well, they had the U.S.-led coalition which is dropping bombs,
as has Russia
against the government forces and supporting the rebel forces. But that's as far. I mean, the previous administration, the Obama administration, drew the line in the sand, but then let everybody walk over it. You're absolutely right. I mean, that was wrong. That was absolutely wrong.
But this whole thing...
instead, they introduced a half-hearted attempt at aerial bombardment.
But wait. We recognize that it... And by the way, for any country to fight there, Turkey has the best position, Turkey and Iran. And, of course, that's the other question. What role Iran may be playing in all of this
Well, Iran is supporting Russia and Assad. And Turkey has flipped sides, and it's supporting Assad as well now.
I mean, it's a real conundrum, and I don't know how anybody can really fight this. It will be interesting. I go back to the issue of economics, what impact this may have on Russia and its ability to work with the European Union. And of course, as we said at the outset, none of these countries are led by people you can trust. I want to move on to other items before we wrap it up. I just wanted to bring up the topic of Syria because yet more to be discovered there. Let's wrap it up with Easter and Cadbury. What's going on?
Well, Cadbury's a big chocolate maker over here.
Right.
And every year they organize Easter egg hunts at stately homes across Britain.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So this year, however, they've insisted that the word Easter be dropped from the advertising.
Why?
Well, because it's not PC. It's just an egg hunt.
Oh. Tom Arms of Look Ahead Radio and Look Ahead News. You've got to be kidding me.
The Prime Minister's come out against them. Mrs. May says it's ridiculous.
This is stunning. Okay, it's not politically correct to celebrate Easter. What a shame. Tom Arms of Look Ahead News and Look Ahead Radio.
Just wait for it. December 25th will just be gift day.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Tom, as always, thank you for being with us this afternoon. We'd appreciate it.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, viewpoints around the world with Tom Arms. And just to remind you, LookAheadNews.com, tomorrow's news today, and Look Ahead Radio, heard on radio stations literally around the world.
Look Ahead Radio is a production of the Talk Station.